Dear Professor Marcelo, dear students and friends, I hope you are doing well. And I'm Feng from the course History 40B in UC Irvine. I am majoring at mechanical engineering right now, and I'm a senior year. Today, I'm going to bring a presentation titled Redefined Yet Restricted: How the Change in Race and Class Influenced the Progress of African Americans in the 19th century America. And here is my visual aid, which is PPT, a PowerPoint. And here's my topic today. And let's go to the next page. So, in the current United States, where racial discrimination is still to a certain extent strangling minorities like Mr. George Floyd, it is not difficult to imagine how hard it was for African Americans to get rid of the disparately solid racial shackles in the early 19th century, right before the Civil War, and especially for those in the South. And in his famous piece, Appeal to the Colored Citizens of the World, David Walker angrily and sadly labeled colored people in the United States the most degraded, wretched, and abject set of beings that ever lived since the world began. And in slide 3, in the early 19th century, great divergence existed between the North and the South when it came to the treatment of African Americans. As we can see on this map, prior to the Civil War, most northern states or territories had ended slavery, whereas those blue southern states of territories retained the wicked system. And this difference between the North and South remained since 1861 to the next few decades. And President Lincoln and the Emancipation Proclamation. Such a difference became an important prerequisite or excuse for the Civil War to break out. In great times came great leadership. President Abraham Lincoln signed an Emancipation Proclamation in which he declared enslaved people free in rebel states, partly to extend his determination to free the slaves to southern states and partly as a strategy to weaken the Confederacy and undermine its economic foundations, which relied heavily on the slavery labor in the plantations. In this important document, President Lincoln made it clear that by virtue of the power and for the purpose aforesaid, I do order and declare that all persons held as slaves within said designated states and parts of states are the henceforth shall be free, and that the executive government of the United States, including the military and naval authorities, therefore will recognize and maintain the freedom of said persons. And the quote B is, he made it very clear that the proclamations was a fit and necessary war measure for suppressing said rebellion, and to further strengthen the military power of the North. He declared that such persons of suitable condition will be received into the armed service of the United States to garrison forts, positions, stations, and other places, and to man vessels of all sorts said service. and this source is originally from Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation. And about the slide 6, after African Americans after the Civil War, and after the thorough victory of the North in the Civil War, the social status of African Americans was to a great extent lifted with the slavery abolished. However, the limitation is that the proclamation only addressed the very basic needs of African Americans to break away from slavery. It is also a big progress economically, as the previous forced labor in plantations was turned into wage labor, so that these African Americans earned the slavery that theoretically matched their hard work. However, it did not address the root concerns for the African Americans, as they did not harvest racial equality. The country leaders soon realized that the century of discrimination against African Americans won't go away simply because of the proclamation. They needed more legally binding channels to address the concern, especially when the progress met its backlash with the Black Code coming out and setting limits to African Americans' rights. This is the reality faced by the leaders of these newly reunited nations, as the law in the North and the South quite contradicted with each other in many cases, especially when it comes to slavery. And next slide. Against the backdrop, we now entered what we call the Reconstruction period, when the rights of the African Americans were partially restored step by step in legal terms. In 1866, the Civil Rights Act was passed in a complicated process and became the first United States federal law to define citizenship and affirm that all citizens are equally protected by the law. The icebreaker is the 14th Amendment, which was put into effect in 1868, and African Americans won another progress they deserve. They were given equal rights, or at least part of the equal right, in legitimate ways. For instance, the 14th Amendment made it clear that all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subjected to jurisdiction, therefore, are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside. In this sense, African Americans were given equal citizenship. Likewise, it stated that nor shall any united deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor deny to any person within its jurisdiction, and the equal protection of the laws, which granted them equal protection under the law and made it clear that their cases have to go through the process of law, eliminating discrimination-driven arbitrary state law enforcement. Moreover, states that denied voting rights of certain people are penalized, which secured that African Americans have equal voting rights. There's a theory versus reality. African Americans made another giant stride in fighting for their rights during the Reconstruction period, with the ratification of the 18th Amendment being the milestone. However, things might turn out the other way when it came to the enforcement of laws. The limitation of the 14th Amendment is the influence of slavery is so deeply rooted in Southern states that the privileged refused to actually treat African Americans as equals and particularly implement the laws passed during the Reconstruction period. The federal government knew the situation and dispatched the Freedmen's Bureau to somehow aid those free African Americans. However, the Bureau's reports indicated the misdemeanors of these freedmen despite the lawful rights newly given to them. So somehow the situation is slightly better than slavery era. And here are some quotes from the Bureau's reports that I read from National Archive. You can see that the situation of African Americans were indeed better than previous times, especially in terms of education and at least getting a wage. But the general status quo is still far from what the amendment described. As the situation deteriorated, Southern elites in favor of previous slavery privileges gained control, and the rights of African Americans were gradually dismantled in reality. Starting from the 1860s, a series of Jim Crow laws were mandated in the South. And the laws enforced segregated but equal treatment for African Americans, a symbol of the restrictions of the process of African Americans fighting for their rights. Sometimes the racial discrimination can be even bloody than ever. In closing, in the 19th century, race and class witnessed significant changes, and the rights of African Americans were on the rise and redefined. When the Emancipation Proclamation set the slaves free and the Reconstruction period protected their rights in legal terms. However, the progress also had its setback and restrictions, as the South refused to actually implement the laws and adopted Jim Crow laws, which brought sufferings to African Americans with segregated but equal rights. I want to wrap up my presentation with a report of violence against African Americans in 1889. In the southern state of Mississippi, when a group of white farmers found that African American farmers shared their market instead of a friendly negotiation, they brutally resorted to violence and killed the African American farmers, in total disregard of the lawful rights of African Americans outlined in 18th Amendment. This is a sad evidence of a failure of Reconstruction's laws. Sadly, even today, when people has been constantly talking about the political correctness in a time when Jim Crow has been put into this bin for decades, African Americans are still facing racial injustice, and the lives of people like George Floyd showing above are still the stake in the face of police brutality. Regarding this, we should definitely do more. Alright, here's a list of works I cited for this presentation, and thank you for your kind attention. Hope you have a good day. Thank you.